It's August 1st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the upcoming Trilateral Summit between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The three leaders will meet at Camp David solely for standalone trilateral talks for the first time, something that could become a regular thing. The extreme heat wave will reach its peak on the first day of August here in South Korea, with Seoul seeing 35 and Daegu as high as 36 degrees Celsius. And the 25th World Sky Jamboree is kicking off in South Korea for the first time in 32 years on Tuesday. Around 43,000 teenagers from 158 countries are gathering in Saemangeum for the world's largest youth camp. Leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan are expected to take their cooperation to a new level during their summit at Camp David this month, with hopes of making the trilateral talks a regular meetup. Our Paeunji starts us off.
The upcoming Trilateral Summit between the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, set to take place on August 18th, will be an opportunity to further strengthen cooperation between the three countries. That's according to South Korea's ambassador to the U.S., Cho Hyun-dong, who noted that the upcoming event will be the first summit to be held at Camp David since President Joe Biden took office. Speaking to reporters in Washington on Monday local time, he explained that the venue for the summit underscores the emphasis U.S. President Joe Biden places on the trilateral cooperation.
This shows how much President Biden thinks of his relationship with our presidents, as well as the relations between South Korea and the US, and the trilateral relations between South Korea, the US, and Japan.
If the summit takes place, it will not only be the first visit to Camp David, the presidential country retreat, by a foreign leader since Biden took office, but it will also be the first since 2015, when former US President Barack Obama was in office. The ambassador added that Seoul has been playing a leading role in developing the trilateral partnership, something that was made possible because of improved relations with Japan.
I believe improved relations between South Korea and Japan is what took the cooperation between South Korea, the US, and Japan to a new level.
Another senior official also noted that officials from the three countries are discussing whether or not to hold a trilateral summit on a regular basis from now on, with the leaders will make the final decision. The official also added that the issue of Japan's plan to release wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant is not on the agenda for the upcoming summit. Paeunji, Arirang News.
Washington says it will impose sanctions on both Pyongyang and Moscow, stressing it won't hesitate to take action when deemed necessary. According to U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller on Monday, the U.S. has previously imposed sanctions on North Korea, but also imposed sanctions on a number of entities and individuals around the world for assisting Russia in its war effort. His remarks come after Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was in North Korea for Armistice Day events, leaving many to believe the two allies may increase military cooperation. It also comes after earlier reports that Ukraine has been firing North Korean rockets seized from a ship that was potentially headed to Russia, indicating a possible weapons trade between the two countries. Luxembourg was among the countries that fought alongside the South during the Korean War. In fact, the country sent the highest proportion of troops relative to the country's population. Our Choi Min-jung sat down with the Luxembourg's Prime Minister.
To commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement last week, Luxembourg's leader Xavier Bettel visited South Korea together with a 93-year-old Korean War veteran, Leong Moyen. Speaking to Arirang News, Bettel said the anniversary was so important that he, as the head of his country's government, felt the need to come.
So for us it's important, that's the reason why I came myself, also that the Prime Minister was important for myself to be here, and also with a veteran, shows the importance for my country.
7 decades ago, Luxembourg was a country with a population of only around 200,000 people. Despite its small size, the country decided to send 100 combat troops to South Korea, the largest number of troops in terms of ratio to population among countries that fought in the Korean War. The Prime Minister explained that it was a soldier's choice to fight for freedom and democracy.
It was a free choice of young guys. And when I spoke to Mr. Moyen, he told me that it was just a short time after Luxembourg was attacked by the Germans. So he decided to defend, even if it was far away, also democratic values. So that's the reason why he decided to come. It was his choice, but I respect it, and we Luxembourg supported it.
The leader also said the Korean War had never been spoken about in his country as much as it was last week, thanks to his and the veterans' presence at South Korea's commemoration events.
So that's what is good to keep in mind and not to forget. We have to learn from every conflict, because we always say history has not to repeat, and we see that history is repeating all the time.
And since the war, the Prime Minister said relations between South Korea and Luxembourg have been good and will be developed further.
But we will open an embassy now in Seoul. Maybe Seoul, Korea will open an embassy in Luxembourg too. That would be next step.
He also looks forward to potential visits to Luxembourg by South Korea's president and veterans minister in the future.
I think this is important because the survivors of the Korean War, 5 are not able to travel, but they would be very happy and moved to see that even if they are not able to travel, they are not forgotten.
Luxembourg's leader stressed that the Korean War has proved South Korea and his country are trusted partners, and that even distance doesn't determine the size of friendship. Choi Min-dong, Arirang News.
It's no exaggeration to say the summer heat here in the country has been deadly, with over a dozen people dying from heat-related illness. Now, what's even worse is that the sweltering heat is here to stay. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The intense heat wave here in South Korea has continued for more than a week, and now the capital Seoul is forecast to reach a daytime high of 35 degrees Celsius on Tuesday, marking the highest temperature this summer. Daejeon is expected to reach 36 degrees Celsius, with Hwasun County in Jeollanam-do Province forecast to hit 37 degrees. While rain is expected to fall in some parts of the country, it won't be enough to quell the intense heat wave. And the prolonged heat wave has also turned deadly, as over a dozen people have died due to heat-related illness this summer. According to the official tally from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there have been at least 1,100 heat-related illness cases this year and at least 13 lives being lost this summer. The majority of those that have lost their lives due to the heat have been elderly farmers. It can be especially dangerous for farmers working inside greenhouses, as temperatures inside can get far higher than outside. For instance, with an outdoor temperature of 30 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside a greenhouse can reach 44 degrees. At the peak of the afternoon, with the outdoor temperature at 34 degrees, the reading inside the greenhouse can spike to 52 degrees. Experts warn that the elderly, who are slow to recognize symptoms, and those with underlying cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases may be particularly at risk and should refrain from outdoor work as much as possible between 12 noon and 5 p.m. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The unbearable heat wave here in South Korea has taken away more than a dozen lives this summer alone. Yet, we still have at least a few more weeks of summer heat. Now, how can we bear it? Today, we're joined by Professor Howard Lee. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Professor Howard, it's best to seek shade and rest as soon as you don't feel well because of the heat. Now, what are some of these symptoms of a heat stroke, and what should we do when we actually have one?
Well, heat stroke is the most serious form of heat injury that people may run into around this time of the year. It happens when the body can't keep the body temperature below 40 degrees Celsius. Which happens commonly after severe physical exertion or prolonged exposure to extremely high external temperature, particularly in the elderly. You have asked about the symptoms. They include lightheadedness, malaise, headache, visual disturbance, and nausea. which can be as mild as they can be. So you have to be very careful about that. So symptoms can get more serious, which include vomiting, stupor, which may lead to coma, eventually multi-organ failure and death in severe cases.
Right. These are mild symptoms like lightheadedness that could potentially lead to something more serious, right? Now, the question is, there are inevitable. Exactly.
Right.
Right. Now,
go ahead.
Now, there are inevitable situations where you have to be outdoors at times, right? Now, what do you have to keep in mind when doing outdoor activities when you absolutely have to do? And especially for those elderly farmers who spend more time in the sun.
Right. There are at least 3 important things that you have to keep in mind. Water, shade, and rest are the 3 important things to prevent us from having a heat stroke. Number 1, water. So you have to drink water as frequently as possible. And also I want urge elderly farmers to stop working outdoors, particularly between 2 and 5 p.m. Because around that time, the outside temperature, I mean, the air temperature can be very high. And also, they have to take a break, I mean, regular break, at least for 10 minutes every hour of work. Then we have to keep in mind that elderly people are particularly vulnerable to heat stroke because their body temperature maintenance mechanism may not work as intended, particularly when they are exposed to extremely hot weather.
Right. Avoid working, try not to work, especially during 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. when it gets the hottest.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Then that was for the tips for our elderly farmers, right? Then what about any tips for ordinary people like us to avoid getting overheated at this time of the year?
Almost the same tips that I can give you, but I think they have to refrain from outdoor activities. Mm-hmm. But should they have to go out, wear a cap or bring a sunshade, such as a handheld parasol. And also, they have to stay inside building where air conditioning is on and air temperature is maintained below 25 degrees Celsius. And also keep hydrating by drinking water regularly, but overhydration is not recommended. Some people may prefer electrolyte-rich solution.
Right, avoid overhydration, but we have to remind ourselves to drink water frequently to stay hydrated. Now, another thing is the tropical nights. The entire nation has been struggling to fall asleep at night. Now, how are tropical nights defined? Is there a certain temperature and for how long?
It's a quite interesting question because tropical night per se, it's not a scientific terminology that every climatologist agrees. However, in Korea, a tropical night refers to a situation that the air temperature does not fall under 25 degrees Celsius during nighttime. That is 6 p.m. Through 9 a.m. next day. In Europe, the cutoff is 20 degrees Celsius, so every country has a different cutoff. And tropical night, what is so troubling about tropical night is that it keeps us from falling into deep, good sleep, which is truly detrimental to work the next day.
Right, I'm one of the victims here. Now, some people feel they have no alternative but to turn on the air conditioning, right, at bedtime, including myself. For how long and at what temperature should we keep the AC on? I mean, should we just rely on our good old fans instead?
Well, I'm not an exception too. I have to say, well, it depends on your settings and preferences. Typically, it is advised to set the temperature at 24 to 26 degrees Celsius. But it can be lowered to 22 to 23 in case of tropical nights. But it's not recommended to keep the AC turned on overnight because it will dry up the air too much. which is not good for the respiratory tract, making us vulnerable to infections. And you have mentioned about the fans, and the fans can help because they create a cross flow in the room, which is beneficial in making your room, your home feel cooler when you increase the air conditioning setting.
Then would it be okay to have the fan on all night? Because I know it's not recommended to have the AC on all night long.
Yeah, I don't want to recommend keeping a fan overnight because it will dry up the air as the air conditioning system does. So it's not good for your, generally it's not good for your respiratory tract. Its detrimental effect is almost the same as the air conditioning system.
Sure, maybe set the timer before you fall asleep so that it doesn't run all night.
Yeah, particularly in the tropical nights, you have to, keep the air conditioning system as strong as it can be with some help from fans, and then run it for, let's say, 30 minutes, and then turn it off, and then you can get, fall into sleep relatively easily.
All right.
But I don't recommend you keep the air conditioning overnight. So, yeah.
Right. Everything in moderation. Water, shade, rest. We'll remember that. Thank you so much for your insight this morning, Professor Howard. You have a good day.
Stay cool. Thank you.
The world's largest youth camp, the World Sky Jamboree, has opened in South Korea. The event takes place at Saemangeum, Jeollabuk-do province on the country's west coast, bringing together some 40,000 teenagers from 158 countries. Now, running from the 1st to the 12th of August, a variety of programs are scheduled, including international food exchanges, a Korean temple stay, and a K-pop concert. It's the second time the country has hosted the event, which is held every 4 years and aims to promote friendship and diplomacy through youth cultural exchanges. This also coincides with the 100th anniversary of the Korea Scout Association. Another round of peace talks to end the war in Ukraine will reportedly take place early this month, this time in Saudi Arabia. But Russia will reportedly not be at the talks. Chung Eun-ju reports.
Saudi Arabia is set to host peace talks in August among Western countries, Ukraine, and key developing nations, including India and Brazil. The meeting comes as Europe and Washington intensify efforts to consolidate international support for Ukraine's peace demands. The Wall Street Journal first reported on Saturday, citing diplomats involved, that the meeting would bring senior officials from up to 30 countries, which include Indonesia, Egypt, and Mexico, among others, to the Red Sea port city of Jeddah, tentatively on the 5th and 6th of August. According to the report, Ukraine and Western officials are hoping the talks, which exclude Russia, will lead to international backing for peace terms favoring Ukraine. It's not yet clear how many countries will attend, but the report said countries that took part in a similar round of talks in Copenhagen in June are expected to do so again. Britain, South Africa, Poland, and the EU are among those who have confirmed their attendance, as has United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Meanwhile, Russia has said it views peace talks with Ukraine would only be possible if Kyiv accepts the new realities, a reference to the country's claims to have annexed around a sixth of Ukraine. Conversely, Kyiv says negotiations with Moscow can only take place after Russia withdraws its troops. Ukraine has also previously said its 10-point peace formula should be taken as a basis, which further includes the restoration of its territorial integrity, the release of all prisoners, a tribunal for those responsible for the aggression, and security guarantees for the country. Arab nations have largely remained neutral since Russia launched the war on Ukraine in February 2022, in part due to their military and economic ties to Moscow. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashling, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Ukraine. At least 6 people, including children, were killed on Monday in Russian missile strikes on the city of Kryvyi Rih. Now, the missiles struck an apartment complex and a university building, wounding 75 others and trapping people beneath the rubble. Hundreds of people are involved in rescue operations, and at least 30 have been pulled to safety. A day of mourning has also been declared. Now, the city attacked is the hometown of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The strikes come a day after the Ukrainian leader said that war is returning to Russia. This is not the first time the city has been targeted. In June, 11 people were killed and 28 wounded after Russia launched missiles at an apartment building and warehouses. Now in Beijing, at least 2 people have died and over 30,000 have been evacuated amid major flooding and landslides in the capital and other parts of northern China. Torrential downpours from Storm Doksuri over the weekend caused Beijing to receive the equivalent of July's annual rainfall in just 3 days. The death toll is expected to rise, and the city has issued a red alert, the most severe weather warning in its 4-tier system. Now, subways have been closed, flights delayed, and tourist attractions, including the Forbidden City, are off limits. Businesses have also been ordered to allow employees to work from home. Coup leaders in Niger have accused France on Monday of planning a military intervention to reinstate the ousted president Mohamed Bazoum. They said Niger's fallen government had authorized the country's former colonial ruler to carry out strikes to free Bazoum. Now, France has not confirmed or denied the allegation, instead saying that its focus is to guarantee the security of its nationals. This comes after the first photo of Bazoum since the coup was released. In it, the ousted leader is seen meeting with Chad's president for in-depth talks to find a peaceful resolution. Bazoum has been confined to the presidential palace since Wednesday after his presidential guard forcefully took power. And finally, actor and comedian Paul Reubens, best known for his character Wee Herman, has died at the age of 70. According to his publicist, Reubens died on Sunday following a 6-year battle with cancer. Reubens created and portrayed the popular 1980s character Wee Herman, recognizable in a tight-fitting grey suit, a red bow tie, and an iconic laugh. He appeared in several films, including the 1985 flick Pee-wee's Big Adventure and the Emmy Award-winning TV series Pee-wee's Playhouse. But the character was put aside for over 2 decades after Reubens was arrested for indecent exposure in 1991. Although the charges were dropped, the incident ruined his reputation. Reubens eventually brought Pee-wee back in 2010 for a Broadway show and in 2016 for a Netflix movie.
Good morning. A wave of deep, blasting heat continues to sweep Korea, with temperatures to rise a bit higher than Monday. Take care during this massive heat wave. Passing rain is in the forecast again, mainly in central regions and parts of Jeollabuk-do province. Those in the capital area should have a strong umbrella handy. It looks like it will rain heavily from lunchtime, with up to 60 millimeters expected. Meanwhile, the rest of the southern regions will be under strong sunshine. Now, the 25th World Scout Jamboree kicks off today in Saemangeum, Buan County in Jeollabuk-do province, about 180 kilometers away from Seoul. The event runs through August 12th, welcoming as many as 40,000 scouts from 158 countries around the world. Well, Buan County is also under a heat wave warning, so please stay safe in the high heat and be sun smart. Meanwhile, highs in most parts will be hovering around 35 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Southern regions and Jeju will see passing rain Wednesday, while the heat stays through next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Wednesday's edition at the same time.